Hi everyone, we are on section 7.4 and 7.5. So we're going to be solving equations and also solving formulas. Alright, so we're going to practice with some equations that have more steps than some of the ones that we did in the past. On this first one, we're going to first subtract 58. Because we want to isolate our variable and get it by itself. So by subtracting the 58, we take care of that. 38 minus 58 is negative 20. And then we're going to bring down the negative 4a. So now we have the variable term isolated, but we have to isolate the variable, and that means we would need to divide by negative 4, because that's negative 4 times a. So we divide by the negative 4 because we're undoing multiplication. Whatever we do to one side, we must do to the other side. And so we get 5 equals a, or we can write that as a equals 5. So it's fine either way. Also, you can always check your solution. So this is kind of nice. You can always see if your solution is going to be correct or not. And we do that by going back to the original equation and substituting for the variable. So negative 4 times 5. And you can just do this with your calculator real quick. You can see that 58 minus 20 does equal 38, so it checks. So on the second equation, we want to isolate the variable term 3x, and that means that we have to get rid of that 1/4. We want that on the other side, so we subtract 1/4 on both sides of our equation. And 3/4 minus 1/4 is 2/4. 2/4 is 1/2, so we can go straight to that. You would be using your calculators anyway. Now, to undo multiplication, we divide, or you guys remember that dividing is the same as multiplying by the reciprocal. We learned that when we talked about fractions. So I'm going to multiply by the reciprocal of 3, which is 1/3, right? Because this is 3 over 1. So reciprocal would be 1 over 3. And I'm really doing that because of this 1/2, right? On the 1/2, if I multiply it by 1/3, that's easier to understand and see. Of course, you can use your calculator and it will do this for you, that process. When I multiply these two fractions, I get 1/6, and then that equals x. 3 times 1/3 is 3 over 3, which equals 1. So I got rid of the variable with the x and made it a 1. That's what I wanted it to be. Remember, we can write this x equals 1/6. We can also check our solutions in the original equation. Now, I'm not going to check every single one, but we may check some of them. I think I'm going to circle this so you can find this in all of this stuff. And then if we did check, 3/4 equals 3 times 1/6 plus 1/2 plus 1/4. 3 times 1/6 is 3 over 6, or 1/2. So that is 1/2 plus 1/4. And that does check because 1/2 plus 1/4 equals 3/4. Here are more equations. Now, on this first equation, you notice that we have a variable written out 2 times. That means that we need to combine like terms. So we're going to take 2.6y and subtract 1.8y. And this way, we will be able to combine our terms. For one, you don't want to try to solve an equation whenever you have more than one variable term. That just makes it more confusing. So we definitely want to combine those. We are going to combine these two terms. Don't forget that this one has a negative, the 1.8. So 2.6 minus 1.8 is 0.8y minus 19 equals 1. Then we are going to add 19 because, once again, we want to isolate our variable term and get it by itself. If I add 1 and 19, I get 20. And remember, I'm adding because it was minus 19, so we're going to use the opposite operation. Last step here is divide by 0.8. And y is 25. And of course, you will find that with your calculator when you take 20 divided by 0.8. Once again, you can go back and check this. I don't have a lot of space, so I'm not going to check this one, but you would just take 2.6 times 25 minus 19 minus 1.8 times 25. Always go back to the original equation in case you made a mistake somewhere as you were solving. Okay, on this next one, I'm going to subtract 17. 17 is positive. I need to get my variable term by itself, so subtract 17. When I subtract 17, I get 6, and then that equals negative x over 4. Be really careful when you have a minus sign right there. Sometimes students neglect that and just bring down x over 4, and then you just change the sign if you do that, because it is a negative. Now to solve, I'm going to multiply by negative 4 because it is a negative term, and that takes care of the negative on that side. So I get negative 24 equals x, right? Because my 4's cancel out when I multiply by the denominator. If you want, and it makes more sense, you can put that negative down here, and that's perfectly fine just for the sake of solving. And so this is our solution. X equals negative 24. And you know you can just leave it this way. This is perfectly fine in this form. All right. So here's another one that has some like terms. All right, we're going to combine these. And then solve from there. So you always combine your like terms if needed, and then you can solve from that point on. We're not solving until we've got everything simplified that we possibly can. If I add these two negative numbers, I get negative 35 equals 5x. So now I've got my variable term by itself, but now I have to get the x by itself. I divide both sides by 5, and x is negative 7. Now, since I do have some space over here, let's check this one. Okay, so I put this in for both of the x's. Then I just write out these numbers. Like I told you, you can do this with your calculator. Oh, let me put a minus there. All right. And then when I add up the right side, I get negative 13. So it checks. This is something you can do with every equation when you're solving equations. Now, it's not so easy to do with just a formula. You'll see what I'm talking about later. Okay, this is a word problem that goes with this section. Once we take this formula and substitute in, we're really just solving an equation. So this is sheet metal trades. The allowance A for a Pittsburgh lock is given by A equals 2 times W plus 3/16, and that's 3/16 of an inch, where W is the width of the pocket. If the allowance for a Pittsburgh lock is 11/16 inches, what is the width of the pocket? So A is the allowance. Remember, they told us that right here. So when we substitute in, we're putting 11/16 in for A. And then we're just solving an equation. All right. So we're going to subtract 3/16. That gives us 8/16. You know what? I'm going to go ahead. So 8/16 is 1/2. Let's just go ahead and write it that way. Now on this to solve, I would be dividing by 2, or I'm going to multiply by 1/2, and that's because of this fraction, right? I have a 1/2. It's easy to multiply a fraction times a fraction instead of taking it and dividing it by 2. So 1/2 times 1/2 is 1/4. And so that's my W. Now on this one I want to write it as 1/4 inches because it's a word problem and my measurements were in inches. Okay, here's the next one. Now this formula is kind of a long, messy one. I'll write it out again and then we'll read about it. We want to identify all the parts. So it says this formula can be used under certain conditions to approximate the length L of belt needed to connect 2 pulleys of radii R and R. So that means we have a radius 2 times. That's plural for radius. If their centers are a distance D apart. How far apart can 2 pulleys be if their radii are 8 inches and 6 inches and the total length of the belt connecting them is 82 inches? Now when you have a word problem like this, you definitely want to go back and read through it again. But the parts that we're given are the 82, which is our length. This is also a good idea. It doesn't matter which radius is which, so we'll just go in the order they gave them. So R equals 8 inches. One radius is 8 inches, the other is 6 inches, and they use capital and small letters just to indicate that we have 2 different ones. And then D is the part we don't know, so we're looking for D. And so then we just substitute everything in and work through this equation. All right, so we're going to substitute 82 for L. The 2D stays because we don't know D. And 3.26 times 8 plus 6, which is 14. So we're going to multiply 3.26 times 14 to get to this next step. And that is 45.64. Now you see that you have to do the simplifying before you can try to solve. At this point, then we can subtract 45.64. And that leaves us with 36.36. And now we're to the solving step. So we're going to divide by 2. And we find that D equals 18.18. Now this tells us to round to the nearest inch right here, if you read that. So D is 18 inches, right? So that's our solution for that formula. Okay, I think this is a good stopping place. So we're going to solve more equations on the next slide, and this is where we'll start up on the next video.